Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Thursday Sangha gathering. My name is Jody, and I am the director of KTC SoCal. I'm happy to see all of you here this evening. This evening's program is presented by Lama Adam. You can find out more about KTC SoCal by visiting our website, ktcsocal.org. Additionally, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, KTC SoCal, to hear all of our past teachings. If you'd like to make a donation to Lama Adam this evening, you can do so on our website or through the newsletter link that was sent today. And if you would like to become a member of KTC SoCal, there's information on different levels of membership as well through our website. As a reminder, please mute your microphones so there's no background noise. Thank you all so much. And now I will hand it over to you, Lama Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. Uh, let's start out with a short guided practice. This will just be brief, but I want to frame today's topic with practice. So, first thing I would say, I know some of us were here doing a little bit of meditation earlier, but just take a second to kind of come into the space. And what I mean by that is just be present, tune into how you feel right now. And whatever name you might give for how you feel, see if you can find it in your body. So rather than thinking too much about what it's called, just see if you can locate it. And then, as I often do, I'm going to ask you to take a second to notice where you lie on a spectrum between spaced out and agitated. So the terms we often use are dull or agitated, torpor, a word I've only heard in this context. But so if we think of one as being dull, 10 as being agitated, those are like the maximums. See if you can figure out a number for where you are right now. And I'm going to give you two options. So if you found yourself on the dull side, in a moment here, I'm going to ask you to visualize white light moving upwards from your heart and just a general sense of upward motion. And if you found yourself on the agitated side, I'm going to ask you to visualize dark light moving downwards, just a general sense of downward motion. And we'll try that now. And something to remember all the time is if you find yourself between about a 3 and an 8, which is where most of us live most of the time, that's actually a good time for Dharma practice. But if you find yourself at a 1 or a 2 or a 9 or a 10, it might be a good time to shift your posture, shift your attention, really do anything you need to do to get back into that window between a 3 and an 8, because that's a space where we can actually push ourselves a little bit. If we're at a 1 or a 2 or a 9 or a 10, I'm thinking of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's instruction in Excellent at the Beginning. There's really no point in meditating if you're completely agitated and your mind's racing. And the same for vice versa. If you're totally dull. But like I said, it's kind of rare that we find ourselves outside that window. And then take a moment to do a similar practice of intention setting. So take a moment to think about a precise, practical goal for our practice here today. and then put that in the context of a broad, idealistic aspect. So, how does this particular precise goal align with your higher altruistic intentions? And note that our practice of um, observing our level of dullness or agitation maps onto this idea of precise, practical, and personal, balanced with vast, idealistic, altruistic. These are kind of two sides of the same coin. And the image I want to give you today that I hope really sticks is this kid having a great time, probably about to get yelled at by his mom for breaking the dining room chair. But I want you to kind of think about this, how fun it is to balance, the process of balance, how it doesn't ever end. You're always paying attention for when we're getting a little unbalanced, then you have to kick your legs up a little bit to stay balanced. You start to move forward, you put a little pressure to move back. And this is a fun thing that most of us have probably tried at some point or another. And I think this is a really good metaphor for Dharma practice. And as a segue into our refuge prayer, we can think about the last two lines of the four-line refuge prayer as also being a balance in this way. Practically, precisely, we know we want to accomplish the six perfections. That may be applying patience in a certain situation. That may be leaning into discipline when we don't feel like doing our practice. But whatever it is we decide to do, we can always put it in the context of our broader intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. So, with that in mind, let's say the refuge prayer. We'll say it once in English, once in Tibetan, and once more in English. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing generosity and the other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. O Sangye Chudang Sukhi Chogyam Trungpa Padu Dagni Kyabsu Chi Dagi Jinso Kipe Sunamki Drola Penchi Sangye Drupasho. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing generosity and the other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. I'll say a short prayer of my own. Taden Sawai Lama Rinpoche, Dadi Chigo Bebe Tenjira, Ajahn Lama Neche Zunze, Usun Togi Ngudrup Sa So. Okay. All right. So we're on part 5 of the 7 points of mind training. Class 12.5, and these will go pretty fast. I think today we're going to just get through all the way through point 5. To put it in the context of the other points, Trungpa Rinpoche, we're working off of his book, Training the Mind, is my main text for this. Of course, checking Great Path of Awakening at the same time and some other versions of commentaries on the 7 points. But the way Trungpa frames this, we have the preliminaries, point 1, and then he relates each of the 7 points to one of the perfect virtues or paramitas. So point 2 is related with generosity and discipline. Point 3 with patience. point 4 with diligence. And this, the one we'll be covering today, point 5, evaluation of mind training. He relates with meditation. And I'll tell you, my preparation of this took a turn I didn't really expect. And I'm glad it did. So and what that turn really is towards an examination of ego, because that word kept coming up a lot in his writing. And so to recall the slide from last time, just recollecting that meditation actually means to familiarize or to get to know or to habituate. I think I catch myself still kind of thinking it means do a magical thing, and it's not that, it's much more simple, it's much more intimate. So remembering that this paramita is related to the paramita of meditation, it means it's all about getting to know ourselves, getting to know the actual situation. And so it begs the question, because he mentions ego so often, what do we mean by ego? And is ego inherently bad? And part of why this came up is because, like, I noticed there's a couple things I noticed. I'd never really thought about how often I think the words ego and ego clinging are used interchangeably, because I think all of us have some sense that there is some utility to ego. Like we need some sense of being an individual to function in the world. And we also need to have some sense of who we are as an individual. What are our preferences? What are our coping mechanisms? We need some familiarity with that. And it's useful and it's helpful, and we benefit beings with that. So I think it's important to note that like we need some clarity about what we mean when we say let go of ego or subjugate ego. So the first thing I'll introduce is Pema Chodron's definition. Ego is that which resists what is. And I think one of the things that implies is that ego itself seems to have some inertia of clinging just on its own. So when we hear just the word ego, like let go of ego, we have to recall that when ego is present, there's always some inclination towards clinging as well. So I think it's fair to say that when we hear ego, that is shorthand for ego clinging. And I think that's an important distinction to recall, because we can't really talk about ego without talking about clinging, and vice versa. So when Trungpa talks about subjugating the ego, we can understand this like not as violence towards any part of ourselves, but as the clarity of seeing through illusion. And the ego in this case is not your personality, it's not your childhood survival strategies or your coping mechanisms. It's the illusion that you are a fixed, solid thing that has to control everything. In fact, those parts of you are worthy of love. Those parts of you that teach you how to survive and teach you, what things you like and don't like and how you feel in a given moment. Those are important, and there's value there. So the training here is to gently recognize when we're clinging to them, and recognize who we are. So to look at like a representation of the actual situation, our ultimate nature, not an actual photo. If we take this circle, we can think about this aspect of voidness. There's an aspect of voidness and there's an aspect of lucidity. And these two things relate to the title of this presentation, this series on the wings of wisdom and compassion. You need both of these aspects. So there's other words that are sometimes used for this: emptiness and form, vivid and insubstantial, voidness in lucidity. And we can see these aspects and the balance of these aspects playing out also on that spectrum from dullness to agitation. When we find ourselves particularly spaced out, We may be a little bit too far on the emptiness side of things. When we find our mind racing, we can't stop thinking about examining a thing. We're maybe a little bit too far on the lucidity or the form side of things. What's to be done? Balance a little bit. It's the process. And another way to look at this is if we think about this actual situation, another name for that dyad here is self-awareness and self-radiance. So what happens, and this is explained in the Four Veils, is we basically end up mistaking each of those for something else. So we mistake the self-awareness as the self. We take that to be who we are, and then the self-radiance we take to be other. And the sun metaphor here, I think, is important because you can't have the sun without the rays. Like we always have this situation of these two things appearing together, and they're really inseparable. So what's ego then? Well, I'll tell you where I think we often go wrong is I think we go, oh, I'm aware of all the things I think, and I'm aware of all the bad habits I have. So ego must be the self-awareness. This is ego. This must be it, right? And then we end up with this false sense of a separation of these two aspects. If you think about the four veils, they say, like if we work backwards, we have karma, action, that's creating, uh, action in the world or thoughts, habitual patterns. And those are caused by strong emotions, kleshas. Kleshas wouldn't exist if we didn't have a sense of duality, a sense of self and other. And that sense of self and other arises because of a fundamental ignorance of who we are, what the ultimate situation is. So we end up with this false sense of the sun's rays being separate from the sun. And so what can go wrong when we equate self-awareness with ego? Well, first we start to, step one is we attempt to eradicate, abandon, and ignore self-awareness in all its manifestations, all the awareness of habits we have or negative thinking or clinging. We start to kind of try to turn that off because we're supposed to let go of ego, right? We're supposed to abandon ego, get rid of it. So that's a big risk. Obviously, that's not a good thing. Second, we start to understand ourselves even less. And we make accomplishing the first of the noble truths, to understand suffering, we make that nearly impossible because we're no longer tuned in to our self-awareness. We're no longer tuned in to what we're thinking, how we react to things. And finally, we strengthen the habit of ignorance, the habit of duality, klesha, and the karmas, the four veils. And I can say, I think this was my mistake for a long time, and I doubt I'm the only person who's made this mistake, but I think it's important to think about when we say we're targeting ego. We need to know what we're talking about, and it is not self-awareness. It's also not self-radiance. So what is ego and what does it cling to? Again, ego is what resists what is, that which resists what is. So it is that resistance that clings to this idea that the sun is separate from its rays and the rays are separate from the sun. It clings to this idea that our self-awareness is a self and the radiance is an other. So to give a quote from Pema Chodron's Welcoming the Unwelcome, she says, even enlightened people still have a sense of being. They have a sense of inhabiting a body, a particular body that's old or young, male or female, tall or short, dark or light. But what they don't have is a sense of belonging to or identifying with their body or their persona. They can do things without identifying with a doer. They can have experiences without a fixed experiencer. They can have thoughts without a thinker. She says, this way may sound foreign, but you can have experience. No, she said, but you can experiment with it and get a sense of what it's like. For instance, when you eat, Contemplate what it would mean to eat without an eater. When you move, explore moving without a mover. When you see or hear, ask yourself what it would be like to do it without a seer or a hearer. When you meditate, look into doing it without a meditator. Whatever you do, try to have a sense of phenomena just unfolding without the presence of a person reacting to or trying to control the experience. This is along the lines of Togme Zangpo's advice not to entertain subject-object fixations. Whatever you do, see if you can experience it directly without any separation between who you are and what you're doing. So he also said the difference between living with and without ego, because that's really what we're talking about. If we're talking about getting rid of ego or subjugating ego, we need to know what it would mean to live without it. So the difference between living with and without ego is like the difference between static and fluid, because ego's tendency is to resist the open-ended, empty nature of how things are. When our experience is dominated by ego, our perceptions become frozen and lose their vibrancy. And a final quote from her, she says, "The idea that we need to get rid of ego is a misunderstanding, one that many people, even experienced Buddhist practitioners, share. The notion that we need to get rid of something within ourselves is a setup for intensifying our inner struggle. It can only inflame our tendency to be unfriendly to ourselves. When the Buddha taught, or what the Buddha taught instead, is the method of non-rejection. Instead of getting rid of ego, the idea is to become very conscious of ego and how it works. Only by getting to know ego intimately will it lose its power and keep us spinning, lose its power to keep us spinning in samsara. Ego manifests in all the countless ways we resist what is. It is there in all our pushing away what we don't want and pulling in what we do want. It shows its face in all our solid views, opinions, and fixed ideas. It is present in the ways we identify ourselves, such as weak, strong, broken, wise, competent, unworthy, and so on. So there is a practice of non-rejection isn't a practice of non-awareness. I'm sorry, a practice of non-rejection is not a practice of like not being aware of how things feel. It's being able to be present with how things feel and make a decision based on that data, much like we did in the beginning when we talked about that window, being aware of how we feel. Are we dull? How dull are we? Are we dull enough that it's not worth doing this thing I'm trying to do? Are we agitated enough that it's not worth trying to do this until I bring myself back into some form of balance? So these things are all related. And what we're hoping for is a recognition of our actual situation to bring the sun and the rays back together. That's really what we're shooting for. That is a situation of non-ego. But again, it's not a situation of non-awareness. And, just a note that like, this is why we have these kinds of practices, these higher tantric practices of yabyum or deities in union. That's the point. That's the whole point. Like we talk about, like on the right, we have Vajrasattva with Vajratopa, and we talk about Vajratopa as being the self radiance of Vajrasattva. And so, I remember in retreat that something that I've always taken with me. I remember asking. It was funny because I asked Rinpoche a question, and sometimes he would just give you like pretty much like one word answer when when it was right. And the question I had for him was, I said. Um, So is the point of all of this that like our self or our sexual desire is actually like mistaken desire for unity of those aspects? Like we misinterpret needing something external to satisfy ourselves because we actually have a really smart desire to bring into harmony our self-awareness and our self radiance. And he said, yes, that's exactly it. So this is kind of the whole shtick, in a lot of ways, this is the whole path, is bringing these things into balance and not rejecting any of it, using all of this. It's all worthwhile. And in its nature, it's all pure and good and enlightened mind. So to bring this back to the 7 points, And I've been revisiting this each time. If we look at the three seeds prayer, we'll use anger. May my anger contain the anger of all beings. By my working through this moment of anger, may I and all beings be free of it. And may we attain enlightenment, the complete freedom from anger. So I made a little adjustment on my diagram from last time. So we have you meeting the three objects, things that are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And if you meet those things and you react, because you're going to meet those things, that's just the way it is. But if you react with ego clinging, well, results is the three poisons: passion, aggression, apathy. If we meet those three objects without ego, without ego clinging, without clinging to a fixed idea of who we are or what we can do or what we need, if we meet those things with wisdom and skillful means, the two aspects, then those things become the three seeds of virtue. So I think the name that this is often called, three objects, three poisons, three seeds of virtue, is a little misleading because it makes it sound like we're going to have all three of them. But really it's like, maybe the better name is like, what are you going to do with the three objects, you know? Or how do we get the three seeds, out of the three objects? Because this is really a choice. Hopefully a choice if we're empowered enough to know what's happening in the moment. But it's always one or two of these paths that we're taking. So to kind of wrap up this whole discussion about ego, there's a chance we can start to think of our self-awareness as synonymous with ego. And that's a problem. We need to watch out for it. The Buddha teaches again and again that whatever it is, be it the self or the preferences or coping strategies, anything else, they are without essence. They're empty of an inherent essence. They're non-dependent, or they are interdependent. So the experience of them, though, is not denied. And we're not to let go of experience. That is our raw material. So it's a dance of not freezing anything, including the ego, into some permanent object of hatred or rejection. So the essence of all thought, remember, is enlightened mind. And we don't want to throw that out. Just like we don't want to train ourselves not to pay attention to that enlightened mind shining through, because it's there, it's here right now. So again, the title of this series relates to that idea as well, that using two wings. So to get into the points of this chapter, the slogans, the first one is all Dharma agrees at one point. And he introduces this by talking about what he means by Dharma here. And Dharma can mean like the way or the truth, but he says in this case, it's really just teachings. He said it's kind of that simple. And he says, and depending on how much the lesson of the subjugation of ego is taking hold in us, that much reality is presented to us. All dharmas that have been taught are connected with that. There is no other dharma. No other teachings exist, particularly in the teachings of the Buddha. So all dharmas are taught to help subjugate the ego or shed the ego. But I think we understand now that that may not be the best construction, I think, in our language, to shed. Subjugate, probably better. But we need to accomplish that taming of ego, as described here. That is because of all of our obscurations. That is the cause of all our obscurations, that ego clinging. If we can remedy the wrong thinking of a reified, concretized ego, like a solidified ego that we think is real, then we're Buddha, and we know it. If you're Buddha and you know it, clap your hands. So that's it, like it's all Dharma is that. So I think there's two things being said here. One is that the purpose of all Dharma is to subjugate ego. And the other is that all Dharma is a remedy. So remedies, recall, like if you think of any remedy you may be taking now, any medicine, any kind of treatment you're receiving, remedies are taken with a specific intention and for a specific course of treatment based on the patient, and how they're responding to that treatment. So they're meant to restore flourishing of that natural system. So once the remedy has done its job, we don't need it anymore. And that system operates as expected to its highest capacity. In this case, like an infinite capacity. So we don't need these sublime teachings so we can shovel out our slop of a crappy nature. That nature is Buddha, and it's not crap, and we don't need to shovel it anywhere. So, but we do need a remedy to clear away what obscures that nature, what hides that nature from us. And Trungpa says, regarding this first point, he says, the Hinayana version of taming ego is to cut through sloppiness and wandering mind by the appreciation of shamatha discipline or mindfulness. Shamatha practice cuts through the fundamental mechanism of ego, which is that ego has to maintain itself by providing lots of subconscious gossip and discursive thoughts. Beyond that, the Vipassana principle of awareness also allows us to cut through our ego. Being aware of the whole environment and bringing that into our basic discipline allows us to become less self-centered and more in contact with the world around us. So there's less reference point to me and myness. In the Mahayana, when we begin to realize the Bodhisattva principle through practicing bodhicitta, our concern is more with warmth and skillfulness. We realize we have nothing to hang on to in ourselves, so we can give away each time. The basis of such compassion is non-territoriality, non-ego, no ego at all. If you have that, then you have compassion. Then further warmth and workability and gentleness take place as well. All Dharma agrees at one point means that if there is no ego clinging, then all Dharmas are one. All teachings are one. That is compassion. And he also says in the Hinayana, our ego begins to get a haircut. Its beard is shaved. In the Mahayana, the limbs of ego are cut, so there are no longer any arms and legs. We even begin to open up the torso of ego. By developing ultimate bodhicitta, we take away the heart so that nothing exists at all. Then we try to utilize the leftover mess of cut off arms and legs and heads and hearts, along with lots of blood. Applying the bodhisattva approach, we make use of them. We don't throw them away. We don't want to pollute our world with lots of leftover egos. Instead, we bring them onto the path of Dharma by examining them and making use of them. So whatever happens in your life becomes a way of measuring your progress on the path, how much you have been able to shed your limbs, your torso, and your heart. That is why this slogan goes along with another saying of the Kadampa teachers, which is, the shedding of ego is the scale that measures the practitioner. If you have more ego, you will be heavier on that scale. If you have less ego, you will be lighter. That is the measure of how much meditation and awareness have developed and how much mindfulness has been overcome. I'm sorry, how much mindlessness has been overcome. And then we have the next slogan, which is, of the two witnesses, hold to the principal one. And he introduces this by saying, in any situation, there are two witnesses, other people's view of you and your own view of yourself. Of those, the principal witness is your own insight. You should not just go along with other people's opinions of you. The practice of this slogan is always to be true to yourself. Usually when you do something, you would like to get some kind of feedback from your world. You have your own opinions of how well you have done. And you've also heard other people's opinions of how well you have done. Usually you keep your own opinions to yourself. First, you have your own opinions about something, and then you begin to branch out and ask somebody else, was that all right? How do you think I'm doing? This is one of the traditional questions that comes up in meetings between teacher and student. In many cases, people are very impressed by you because you look fit and you're cheerful a great deal and you seem to know what you're doing. A lot of compliments take place. On the other hand, a lot of criticism could come to you from others who do not properly and fully know what is actually happening within you. This slogan says that of the two witnesses, Hold the principal one as the actual authentic one. That authentic witness is you. And that authentic witness is self-awareness. Like that's how we're going to track that. So, I mean, self-radiance and self-awareness, but to get back to that potential pitfall of trying to shed self-awareness. And so then he goes into some examples of how long and how long we've been with ourselves and how well we know ourselves. And I'm not going to go through them all, but like you've never been apart from yourself. Like you were there when you were a kid. You were there at all the important moments in your life. No one knows you better than you know you, and you know you way better than the next person who knows you the most. Whoever you think knows you the most, you know yourself exponentially better than they do. And he also talks about examples of how we try to get away with things, how we maybe keep secrets or do things privately, thinking, I hope nobody else finds out. And then the flip side of that would be doing things and trying to make sure everybody knows we did them, make sure everybody is aware of the thing I did, But at the end of the day, you're the only one who really knows the whole story. And you are the authentic authority on your own development in your own state. So he says the judgment of how you are progressing in Lojong practice is yours. And he also says, you know best about yourself. So you should work with yourself constantly. This is based on trusting your intelligence rather than trusting yourself, which could be very selfish. And I think this is the most important quote. He says, it is trusting your intelligence by knowing who you are and what you are. You know yourself so well. Therefore, any deception could be cut through. If someone congratulates or compliments you, they may not know your entire existence. So you should come back to your own judgment, to your own sense of your expressions and the tricks you play on others and on yourself. That is not self-centered. It is self-inspired from the point of view of the non-existence of ego. You just witness what you are. You are simply witnessing and evaluating the merit rather than going back over it in a Jungian or Freudian way. So trusting your intelligence rather than trusting yourself is an interesting idea. And I think we're talking here about like trusting your Buddha nature rather than trusting your ego. And a common pitfall here is overriding intelligence in favor of instructions that we once received to do a thing a certain way. It's worth considering that. I know I did a lot of this and probably still do, but it's a little more uncomfortable space to be in to recognize that we're the authority, that we ourselves know best for ourselves. That's a little that's scary, and it also means we have to think, it means we have to be aware of what's happening and make choices. And that can be difficult. It's in a way, it's easier to just always do the thing someone else told us. And so, like I said, the common pitfall here is overriding your own intelligence because somebody told you once that you have to do it, this way, like X. And another way that happens is if someone gave you an instruction and they gave you the word always or never in that instruction. That's another way we can kind of make an excuse to override our self-awareness or our intelligence. And then we get to the next slogan is always maintain a joyful mind. And Trungpa says the point of this slogan is the realization that whenever situations of an ordinary nature or extraordinary nature come up, our pot boils over, or our steak is turned into charcoal, or suddenly we slip and lose our grasp. Oh, you know what? I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. He says, for always maintain a joyful mind. He says, the point of this slogan is to continuously to maintain joyful satisfaction. That means that every mishap is good because it is encouragement for you to practice the Dharma. Other people's mishaps are good also. You should share them and bring them into yourself as the continuity of their practice or discipline. So you should include that also. It is very nice to feel that way, actually. And he says this slogan is connected to the previous one. Of the two witnesses, hold the principal one. So we have to think of the two witnesses, hold the principal one as being related with always maintain a joyful mind. Trungpa says that if you have been raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition of discipline, the idea of watching yourself is based purely on guilt. But in this case, it is not that way. We do not have any logic that acknowledges, understands, or presents a concept like original sin. From our point of view, you are not basically condemned. Your naughtiness is not necessarily regarded as your problem, although it is witnessed, obviously. You are not fundamentally condemned. Your temporary naughtinesses are regarded as coming from temporary problems only. Therefore, to follow up on that, this slogan says, always maintain only a joyful mind. It is a joyful mind because you do not have to be startled by any situation of wretchedness, or for that matter, sudden upliftedness. Instead, you can maintain a sense of cheerfulness all along. To start with, you maintain a sense of cheerfulness because you are on the path. You are actually doing something about yourself. While most sentient beings have no idea what should be done with themselves, at least you have some lead on it, which is fantastic. If you step out into Brooklyn or the black hole of Calcutta, you will notice that what we are trying to do with ourselves is incredible. Generally, nobody has the first idea about anything like this. It is incredible, fantastic. You should be tremendously excited and feel wonderful that somebody even thought of such an idea. So, what I really took from this is it made me kind of realize I was Christian briefly, and was not raised in a religious house at all. Half Christian, half Jewish, but not really practicing of either until I got to high school. And I met a girl, and she went to a church. And so I started going to a church for like a year. And but it didn't really click with me how deeply I still have this ingrained sense of like needing to judge, and not just see what I'm doing and know what I need to fix it, but also add some sort of judgment that it's bad that I'm doing that thing, and see here's that bad part of me coming out again. And so I think it's worth really considering how woven into our culture that sort of a view of inherent sin might be. I mean, it may not be there for all of us, but it's worth considering because it is really baked into a lot of our culture here. And similarly, like it's baked into the marketing. And so much of what we consume, whether we think of it as advertisements or not, is some kind of marketing. Like especially now with this attention economy, we're trying to keep people engaged, and so much of that has to do with the ways we're flawed. Pointing out the way we need improvement or the thing that we need because we're not complete without this thing. Um, there's just a whole lot of that. Like we're always told we're lacking in all these different ways, and even our stories. If you look at like what a movie or a TV show is. I've been uh, doing some exploring on marketing for my nonprofit, and there's a very popular book called Story. I think it's called Story Brand, or the Story Brand Framework. And he has this like 7-point framework that every story ever is, and it's basically like a character who has a problem, who needs to meet a guide who gives them a solution, and then you have to make clear like what'll happen if you do the solution, how will your life be better, or how will your life be worse if you don't follow that solution. And you can map that onto every movie, Star Wars, any TV show. There's always, it may not be the whole arc of the movie, but like each episode of a TV show is always like some character has some sort of problem. Are they going to fix it? Somebody with a solution appears. Do they do it or not? Then becomes like the cliffhanger or whatever. So like this is so woven into our culture, and it's not like that in every culture. I'm going later this week. A friend of mine who's a professor at Case is doing a series of movies there, and one of the movies is by a Bhutanese director called The Monk and the Gun, and it's a new movie. And I heard him talking about how in Bhutan they stories to them they don't have a word for like tell me a story. They just say like untie a knot, and that's how they like tell a story, like untie that knot for me. And And I think about other things I've read, like sometimes you'll read stories from other cultures and they just feel weird. And I've noticed that a lot of times it's because I'm missing that framework of like, oh, well, what's the big hurdle? What's the problem they have that needs to get solved? Because that's how we do it here. Like it's so baked in to our culture. We kind of think that's just how a story is supposed to work. And that stuff runs deep. And so I think it definitely relates to this idea of having a joyful mind. We can recognize the things that need to be fixed. We can recognize when we forget to apply those things. We need to know all this stuff, and it doesn't have to be inherently bad. In fact, it has to be great. It has to be awesome. The coolest thing ever is noticing when there's a mistake, and because then we can fix it. So I think it's radical to consider ourselves the opposite of like inherently flawed. But from our view, the Buddhist view, we're inherently pure and we're fully flourished, like a Buddha is. We've got some work to do and we have to balance the path and the goal. But like that is ultimately the view. It is not a situation of lack or impurity. So it's understandable it might take us a long time and an awful lot of fits and starts and backslides. We are pushing upstream here. And in a lot of ways, we're pushing against our whole culture. So Trungpa also says, and I think this is encouraging, he says, this kind of cheerfulness has a lot of guts. It's founded in Buddha nature, Tathagata. And then our last slogan in this section is, if you can practice, even when distracted, you are well trained. And this slogan, in many ways, gets at the heart of the Mahayana approach of transformation. So we talk about the Hinayana approach of abandoning, letting go, the Mahayana approach of transformation, and the Vajrayana approach of recognition. So what we're talking about here is transforming our distractions, our unmindfulness, into reminders. And in that way, we can come to see that self-radiance as harmonious with the self-awareness and inseparable, in fact. So when we can do that and trust that it's really the path, that's the path, then every moment of forgetfulness or ignorance becomes the seed of something fantastic. Mindfulness and awareness. That's the seed of it. It's like an instantaneous demonstration of the three seeds prayer. Trungpa says, the idea of the slogan is the realization that whenever situations of an ordinary nature or extraordinary nature come up, our pot boils over, or our steak is turned into charcoal, or suddenly we slip and lose our grasp. A sudden memory of awareness should take place. Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary talks about a well-trained, powerful horse who loses his balance and suddenly regains it again through losing it. And the sutras talk about the bodhisattva's actions being like those of a well-trained athlete who slips on a slippery surface and in the process of slipping regains his or her balance by using the force of the slipping process. So whenever there is a sudden glimpse or sudden surprise of losing one's grip, that seeming fear of losing grip of one's reality can be included properly. To do so, there is a need for renunciation. It is not your chauvinistic trip that you are a fantastically powerful and strong person and also have a sense of mindfulness taking place all the time. But when something hits you, which is the result of unmindfulness, then suddenly that unmindfulness creates a reminder automatically. So you actually get back on track, so to speak, able to handle your life. And so one idea here is to use your go-to cuss words. Like go to your, use your go-to swears, like when they come up. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with swearing. I do a lot of it, but I'm just saying when they pop up, in some sort of reaction to something, that's a great reminder. That's like a little alarm clock, like, oh, we could just be present with this, or we could generate some compassion. I could abandon this. I could abandon, transform, or recognize, to take the three vehicle approaches. I could let the situation go. I could try to transform it through the three seeds prayer, or I could recognize that I'm Chenrezig. all of these things are options in the moment. And so any strong emotion, any sense that something has gone wrong, and there's even a thing in Moonbeams of Mahamudra, there's even a section in there. I've tried to find it, and I wasn't able to find it today, but there's a name, I forget what it is, or there's a name in Tibetan for how when that happens, you never actually left a state of awakening, like that in that moment of realizing the mistake, like you are awake, so it's this same kind of process of like regaining your footing through the slip, you know and to come back to the imagery of balancing in the chair, like the only way you can balance is when you notice moving towards imbalance. Like as you notice the motion towards imbalance, you compensate, you add a little bit of the other direction. And so it's only through noticing those dynamic shifts of life, towards dullness, towards agitation, towards emptiness, towards lucidity. Like as we notice those shifts, like that is our reminder, and that's beautiful. So I think it's really important to utilize all of those. And finally, I'll just say, he says, when you meet with a situation, that situation affects your emotions and your state of mind. But whenever your state of mind and emotions are affected because of that jolt, suddenly the situation itself becomes your awareness and your mindfulness. It comes to you. So there is no need for you to put effort into it from your end. You do not have to try to protect, to understand, or be watchful. That does not mean that you should just give up and things will come to you all the time. There's obviously a need for you to develop basic awareness and mindfulness and to be alert altogether. But that alertness could be a fundamental frame of mind, which is connected with the paramita of meditation. And just to close up this point, he says, what we've been discussing in point 5 is quite straightforward. The main point is not to let yourself be wounded by the fangs of neurosis, the fangs of the kleshas. The way to do that is to recognize that all Dharma agrees at one point, which is the taming of one's ego. That is the scale on which practitioners can be weighed. Of the two witnesses, hold the principal one means to start with your own judgment of how you are doing. Always maintain only a joyful mind means having a sense of cheerfulness because you are not trapped in heavy-handed discipline. You can experience a sense of joy, particularly when extremely evil or extremely joyful situations occur to you. And the mark of being well trained is that you can practice even when distracted. If you practice some of this, I am sure we will not have any problem in producing thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in this century. So I just noticed that in the chat, I realized I missed a question earlier. If someone wants to, I'm not quite sure. Oh, Jody, I'm not sure, quite sure which slide that was. Sorry, I missed that.
It was the two slides, and they're the one on the left.
Oh, was it the deities?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yeah. I can come back and show you. So that was on the left was Red Chenrezig.
Can you show me?
So yeah.
That's Red Chenrezig.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
So what's
it's
the,
funny because
yeah,
go ahead.
it didn't look anything. I don't think I might have seen that, but then there's like somebody looking up at him. Well,
Yeah, so that's the consort. That's his consort. In this case, Vajrayogini.
okay.
So it's fascinating. Like I feel like I don't think I'm the person to do it just yet, but I feel like there is a lot about the whole gender dialogue that Tibetan Buddhism could really weigh on in very helpful ways. Because like what we're talking about here is a recognition of the seeming differences being in union ultimately. And I think that's really important. And I'll tell you, there's a lot about gender that comes up with these things. Like I remember someone like I think it probably happens. I mean, anytime people do this, but I remember there are a lot of times where women will say like, well, why do I have to visualize as a man? And it's not, first of all, it's not really that simple, like we're not talking about people. but the idea of gender is utilized in these practices as a means to work with seeming duality, and bring those things together in the way that we all know very well, that everybody has a strong connection and that strong urge for union. And I think that message from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche is so impactful, like that the root of that urge. And I've also heard other teachers say that the root of all desire is sexual desire. And I don't think that means necessarily sex. I think it means a wish for union, a wish for some kind of harmony and reuniting. And that reuniting is that self-awareness with that self-radiance. It's bringing those things together, self and other, self-awareness, self-radiance, emptiness and lucidity, dullness and agitation. And it's like making it so that those things, while they seem to exist separately, there's a recognition that they aren't separate, and they're all part of the ultimate situation or manifestations of that ultimate situation. And that comes to mind for me a lot with the just general things that I think I want or I need, or I feel like I'm lacking a thing. Like I look at that and I go, okay, there's a dynamic here that everybody's experienced, and I may be misapprehending this as like I actually need this external thing to satisfy my ennui or my angst or whatever it is. But like in fact what I actually need is to practice in the ways that we've been taught, like non-rejection and awareness and compassion. Being aware of what's happening and being compassionate with the situation is always an answer. Yeah, I said always. Sorry. uh, we got time for probably one more. I'm curious how the ego thing landed because I kind of went down a rabbit hole on ego. Did that resonate?
Yeah,
Yeah, they
that's
hardly
one
ever
thing.
talk about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It resonated with me. So I'm glad you brought it up and talked about it. So thank you.
Good, good. Thanks, Jared. Good to see you. Lisa, and
Yeah,
then we'll have to wrap up.
they very rarely. I mean, I very rarely hear about ego in talks. So it's good to hear that. 'Cause, yeah, it's there, you know.
Yeah, and I think it was the last talk too where I mentioned because it came up in the last one too around the idea of repudiating the ego, of like personifying and repudiating the ego. And I remember I kind of mentioned that like my fear when we encourage people to speak negatively to the ego is we might actually be taking some friendly fire, in ways that aren't helpful. And so I think that's actually a pretty difficult practice, I think, to apply effectively. And it's worked for me at times, and I think at other times it's felt weird, and maybe everybody's had experiences like that, but I think that helps explain the mechanism there, that we might actually be kind of being acting negatively towards things we need and things that are really valuable, and things that we've learned through the years that help us to be good practitioners or help us to be good people. And so I think it's important to recognize that idea of ego being what resists what is, and that what is this ultimate situation that is non-dual, but appears from our relative view to have these two aspects, emptiness and lucidity. All right, so I will put the dedication prayer on the screen.
I have one quick question, Lama Adam.
Yeah, sure.
So, do you think there's such a thing as Buddhist guilt? You know how,
Oh, tell me more.
there's Jewish guilt and Catholic guilt and everything, right?
Yeah.
Guilt. Is there such a thing?
Well, tell me, because I know that phrase a little bit. It's like, what would be an example of Buddhist guilt?
I
Like
don't
this kind of thing of like, I mean, my instinct is to say, oh yeah, of course, there's that, but I also kind of want to understand the question a little more.
I don't know, like, are you really practicing enough? Or how are you practicing? And what, like, mostly like just like being accountable for your, like, are you practicing? You know, well,
Ah,
acting like that, that's not like what a Buddhist would do, like trying to guilt you into stuff.
yeah. I would say that that's where that slogan about like if you can practice even when distracted,
Yeah.
you're well trained. I think that's where that comes up because I would say that the distraction is, and this relates to the way we train in contemplating too. I think the distraction is going down a road of judging yourself when you've already gotten the data you need, which is,
Right.
oh, I should do some more practice, you know? And I think the distraction in that situation is the judgment, is the, and that, yeah, I would say that's definitely Buddhist guilt, just like any other Catholic guilt or Jewish
Great.
guilt. Yeah.
Thanks for answering.
Do you ever
Yeah,
say, "Oh
you're
my
welcome.
God, I'm such a bad Buddhist"? Have you ever done something or said something and you're like, "Oh my God, I'm such a bad Buddhist"?
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah,
like
for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
But I think so like another thing, like I always think it's funny when like if when like somebody says, oh, I'm such a idiot or something, and like if it's my friend who says that, I'll always say, quit talking about my friend like that, you know. And I think it's kind of like that with us too, you know what I mean? Like quit talking about my Buddha like that, you know, because in a way that's sort of what it is. And I think, to be honest with you, I feel like that is uh, on the one hand, that is one of those reminders. You know, when I feel that way, that's a reminder, like, oh, that's like slipping. I need to regain my footing here. You know, it's not that I'm actually a bad Buddhist. It's that I did a thing that's now reminding me of my guru or Chenrezig or a practice, and that's actually really good. And so I think it's these are good questions because I think we all feel these things, and it's a product of lifetimes, but it's also just a product of our culture, you know? And so it's really good to be aware that these mechanisms are happening, these habitual reactions are happening because they're not inherently bad. And they're actually our reminders, you know, so that in a way they're precious. But then the question becomes, do we act on them, you know, or do we kind of wallow in that negativity? But yeah, thanks for this. Like I loved going through this. I'm loving going through all of this stuff because like it's just nice to be able to dig into these points and these chapters and spend a little more time on them and follow some of the side paths. And I really appreciated this one. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody else anywhere else say that that this point is related with meditation. And I think it became really apparent to me through these four slogans how much it is tied with the paramita of meditation. So I'll share the dedication prayer and actually one last picture. So do you see the little boy? And he's the sun. Ta-da! He's Buddha and he knows, claps his hands. So now we'll dedicate the merit. We'll do two stanzas, I guess. The two parts of the dedication prayer. The first here relates to the relative aspect. The latter relates to the ultimate aspect. So we kind of start by dealing with compassion and helping other beings, and from a relative standpoint. And then the last page kind of seals things with the idea of ultimate truth and unity. So we'll chant together. By this merit, may all beings obtain the omniscience of Buddhahood and defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, may we free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and also all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all this virtue. All right. One last thing I thought of that I wanted to share. I think it was Lama Yeshe, the translator, but I remember somebody saying like that last stanza is important because it's like saying to the Buddhas, I don't know how to do this. Can you do it for me?
Oh, okay.
So I like that way of thinking about it. But good to be with you all.
Thank you, Lama Adam, and
Thank
everybody
you.
for being
Thank
here.
you.
We'll see you next month. Until
See you
then.
all soon.
Stay safe.
Easy.
See you
Bye-bye.